So this first call is very special because I kind of arranged this call beforehand. We're going to talk to a guy named Shawn, and Shawn has his own show where he talks about conspiracy theories, and we agreed to talk about some 9/11 conspiracy theories today. Shawn, you're on the air right now, man. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. Okay, so yeah, you want to talk a little bit about your show and stuff because I think that's really interesting.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I host a conspiracy theory show called Conspiracy Theories and Chill. I stream it live from Facebook, but I also post it to YouTube. I'll make a video each episode and about a specific conspiracy, but then afterwards we'll hang out for about an hour and just talk about anything I get in the comments. I'll just kind of wing it. It's always a live show. Mm-hmm. So I'm pretty well versed in most conspiracies, and we just hang out and have a good time.
Now, are these conspiracies that that you adhere to, believe in? Some you do, some you don't, or are you debunking? Like, what's kind of the flavor of the show?
Well, some I believe in, and some I don't. There's not a whole lot of debunking that goes on. I mean, I might get into things that I downright disagree with, but I don't as far as do debunking videos. But I'll do any request. I'm really into conspiracy, so anytime a viewer will ask me to cover a topic, I'll go into it and look at it from a impartial viewpoint, just for that viewer. So I have no problems exploring different topics that I might not agree with.
Awesome. And that's a really good attitude to have. And that's why we brought you here on the show, because I had heard from other podcasters and stuff that you had been on their shows and you've been talking about this stuff. And I think it's something that's great for Truth Wanted. I definitely, from the beginning, have wanted to be more inclusive to all kinds of beliefs and ideas, conspiracy theories included, whether you actually believe in them or not. And you are our first official conspiracy theory person to have on the show, as far as I know right now. So I'm glad that we get to talk about it. So I think before we were talking about 9/11 truth stuff, but if there's another conspiracy theory that you genuinely believe in, that's what I want to hear about. Just anything we can talk about on here.
The one that I would be the most positive about would be 9/11.
Okay.
But I also firmly believe that, for example, that we've never been to the moon.
Ooh, gosh. Okay, so those are two enticing things to me to talk about.
That's two entire episodes worth just to tackle.
Yeah.
I'm curious, when you say that you're a 9/11 truther, what aspects? Because I've heard different people's takes on different things. I've heard some people say that it was the entire thing was a U.S. government orchestration. I've heard people say that the U.S. government knew about it, but they let it happen, but it was still Saudi hijackers. I'm curious kind of where you fall.
Well, where I fall is I believe that 9/11 was an orchestrated event carried out by the United States and Israel. I believe the CIA and the Mossad worked together to carry out 9/11. As far as our government's involvement, I feel like there was involvement in the highest tiers. I believe that Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney, and President George Bush would have had to have been involved, or at least in the know. So, but as far as the rest of the government and people thinking that the government pulled it off, I don't think that. I believe that we had a part in it, though.
Okay. Yeah, so I know, because you host the show, you've probably done a lot of research on this particular topic. And I know that there's probably a lot of reasons that have led you to the conclusion that you do. If we can, I'd like to just discuss your biggest, I guess we could say, evidence, your biggest reason for your confidence in this belief. And I'd love to just talk about that.
The thing that was the biggest smoking gun of the whole event to me was the collapse of Building 7. It didn't seem right to me. Something seemed wrong with it. And the more I looked at 7, the more I had doubt that a building could collapse like that due to office fires, which made me doubt the whole story, and it just kind of snowballed from there.
If there was a similar building that collapsed like that from office fires, would that change your mind?
That collapsed it in that particular fashion, it might. I mean, I would be interested in seeing it.
Okay. So if there was a building in, let's say, Iran a few years back, that it was a steel-framed building that caught fire and collapsed in a similar fashion, that if I told you that happened, would that alter the belief, or maybe kind of make you reconsider, or?
Well, the belief is pretty strong, so
Okay.
It would take more than that. It would take more than seeing one more example of a building in Tehran. I don't even know much about the building. If they're comparable, then it would cause a chink in the armor for sure. But
Okay.
there's a lot more that I have problems with about 9/11. It just started with 7, and that's the one I'm the most disturbed about is the collapse of Building 7.
So if we could put your confidence in this belief being true on a scale from like 0 to 100, 0 being absolutely zero confidence, 100 being, yes, this is totally real and nothing could change my mind, what do you think you could label your confidence at?
Well, I wouldn't want to go so far on the spectrum to be where I wouldn't change my mind. So I'd throw it at 80.
80%. Okay, cool.
Yeah, that's fair.
So what we kind of like to do on this show is we're not necessarily trying to tell you whether we think your belief is correct or not correct. I have a bunch of different guest hosts that believe in a bunch of different things. What we're more interested in is the methods of how you came to this belief, and if you're willing to change your mind based on different kinds of priors. So, for example, some people really value the scientific method. If they saw something through the scientific method that would change their way of how they think science works, then they would change their confidence about their belief, for example. And so that's why we're kind of asking, okay, so like what are some of the big, heavy-hitting reasons that we can kind of talk about so we can understand, okay, if there's another way we can spin this, or if there's another way we can show you that this may not be the case, or if somebody could demonstrate to you some form of evidence or otherwise that could change your mind about something, we'd be interested in kind of knowing that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool.
You're a lot better at this than I am. I dive straight into, what about this? What about, I tend to be...
here's what I think. I think human psychology doesn't really gravitate towards, like, if you show somebody, like, scientific evidence for something...
backfire effect.
You get the backfire effect, right? You get this this thing that happens to people where they actually double down on their beliefs rather than, change their mind about things. And some people, like, don't value science as much as, like, somebody you or I would. So, like, showing them a journal from a scientific study, that might not mean anything to them. So you have to work with people's values and how they, got there, and if those are good values, or even if that's even a coherent concept, because that goes into a whole other thing. But so anyways, back to this conversation, Shawn. So I know that you probably, like we were talking about, have a whole bunch of research on this topic. Do you think that there's other reasons that we could talk about, maybe, of why you hold this belief to be true? Because you also mentioned a whole bunch of other stuff, like different people were involved and things like that. So I think there's other reasons that are convincing you of this, right?
Oh, well, yeah. This has been a long-held belief. I didn't believe it at first. At first, I was just like any other American, went to be extremely patriotic, listened to NPR every day, watched CNN, watched all the official coverage I could get of the event. It's just something always seemed off about it. And the more I dug into it, the more that seemed off about it. And at a certain point, I became convinced.
So, man, how do you want to tackle this, Thomas? Is there any questions you want to ask?
So I'm kind of curious as to, so you've heard different presentations put forth. When you hear a new piece of information, what type of sources are you normally what are your go-to when you're researching this? I'm kind of curious.
I like to use as much actual coverage that I can use to look into. I like to use accepted sources. Am I making sense? Mainstream sources for my research. Like, I wouldn't use some of the deeper stuff like on YouTube where it's just a guy sitting in front of a screen like me, breaking it down. I would want to find out from more of a scientific viewpoint, like engineers and architects and engineers from 9/11 Truth. That was a video that really struck home with me, and it was just all experts in architecture and engineering talking about the event. So things like that. I'm saying I'm a lot.
Was the video? I've seen a few different videos similar to that. Was this video created by the architects and the engineers, or was it something that it was like someone took footage and took quotes and stuff of engineers and
no,
compiled it together?
You're talking about. It's all chopped up and changed, but no, I ordered mine. I got mine through the mail. I ordered it from the source. So the version that I would have put stake in actually came from the publishers of the video. I'm not talking about viewing it off of YouTube, but I see what you mean. It's been edited and doctored 100 times.
Yeah. Well, what I'm asking more is, like if it's a group of engineers that are getting together and sharing their story and their, why they're doubtful, versus something that's, hey, these engineers said these comments that seem a little suspect when taken out of context.
Oh, no. In this particular video, they are clearly talking about the event. It's not them saying something that you could twist. This particular video, they are talking about the event. Now, I did not look into the individual engineers, but there are thousands of them that have signed off on this petition.
What is the
Anyways,
petition
that was just
exactly?
one example of a source that I would use, something where there's people in that particular field whose opinion I can trust, because I'm not an architect.
Okay.
But I would listen to someone that is. And, in this video, for example, just this one particular example, there's multiple architects and engineers talking about this. And I found that interesting. That was something that helped me come to a conclusion.
Now, I just want a clarification for details. Do you think, maybe you said it earlier and I actually missed it, you think this was a controlled demolition, or do you think this was something else?
I think it was a controlled demolition.
Okay.
All 3 buildings.
Okay, cool. So have you ever heard any statements from any people who were like, so because like you mentioned the science aspect of it, which I think is really interesting. I think you could make a case of whether or not the events that we saw like could have happened scientifically or not, were they physically possible. But the other aspect of this explanation for the events is also like people involved. So like you mentioned a couple of different names there, like Dick Cheney and other people who were kind of like responsible for these things. Can I ask you, what is it about these specific people that caused you to believe that, first of all, they would want to do an event like this, but also that they were even involved?
Absolutely. So we'll use Dick Cheney, for example. Dick Cheney, well, let me backpedal a little bit. We'll have to combine Donald Rumsfeld in here, too.
And we don't need a super detailed explanation also, by the way. We just want to get like a basic rundown of like what the events are. I'm not looking for the most detailed explanation in the world for this point.
No, I was going to try to broad stroke it for you.
Okay, great, awesome.
So the shoot-down order for planes was changed to where you had to contact the Secretary of Defense. Donald Rumsfeld was MIA during the events of 9/11. It's weird that order was changed and then changed back afterwards after they, because you could argue that they realized that it didn't work and they had to change it back. But it's weird that it was changed for that event. And the other side of it for Dick Cheney is his connections to Halliburton and how much money they made off of the entire event and our activities in the Middle East since the event.
Okay.
So that's what made me think of them 2 people.
So like a financial incentive might have been involved in this, is kind of what you're saying. Yeah.
Well, Dick Cheney's company Halliburton made $60 billion off of the event.
So
not the event, but what they got to do because of the event, because of the war in Afghanistan.
Okay.
So do you think that there would have been other ways, like, and I'm not even going to go into whether or not they wanted to have a war in Iraq or Afghanistan, but were there like,
they were on record about wanting one.
Well, that I'm not going to even open that. What I'm saying is, assuming that they did, that 100% they're like, we want to go to war. Are there not other ways that are more feasible than attacking your own people and slaughtering thousands of American civilians and killing destroying a symbol of free trade and prosperity and humiliating your own country?
There are other ways, but false flags are the way that our country has always used. I would point to the Gulf of Tonkin incident as a backup on that. That never took place, and we used that to get into the Vietnam War. We use false flags all the time.
But
so they could use other methods, but that seems to be the one they like to use.
Okay, because I think what throws me off there a little bit, and correct me if I'm missing something, but it just seems odd that they would use a story of Saudi hijackers to go to war with Iraq, a country that they were 100% just, I say they, like the U.S. and Europe as well, were 100% justified in going to war with for other reasons. Saddam Hussein he'd already violated so many different human rights abuses, including attacking his own people, using chemical weapons against the Kurds, invading Kuwait. Like, there were a number of fronts in which we would have been entirely justified to go in without having an incident like 9/11. It just seems odd that they would have the Saudis hijack planes and have that be the cover story in order to go to war with Iraq. It just seems kind of nonsensical to me.
Okay, but what you just said sounded nonsensical to me, because you over and over again we talked about how it was Saudi terrorists. Why did we never go to war with Saudi Arabia? Why would we go to war with Afghanistan? Why would Saudi Arabian terrorists be led by Osama bin Laden? There was a lot in that story that didn't make sense. So that's kind of nonsensical too. The official story is nonsensical.
And what do you consider as the official story?
I'm talking about the official establishment version of the 9/11 report. Basically, would be the official story with their account of what actually went down and what was behind each event.
Okay, just making sure that we're on the same page on that. Well, this is interesting. So this is like a very detailed belief that you have. Very much different than from a lot of the stuff that we talk about. And again, we haven't ever talked about conspiracy theory stuff before on this show. And so this is kind of new territory for me as well. Again, I'm trying to hold my personal beliefs out of the question. I will let you know that I personally don't have the same views that you do, but I also haven't done the research that you've done. So maybe there are some things that you know that I don't. Maybe there's some things I know. We don't know. We haven't had that dialogue yet. But as someone who would want to know more about this kinds of stuff, like if someone who is really interested in some of the details, what do you think is the best way to investigate whether or not an official story purported, about an event is true? Like, what is your go-to in figuring out whether something is telling us is total BS or not?
Well, that's a very good question. Let's see, how would I answer that? I got to use something as an example here. The shooting in Vegas at the Mandalay Bay. To me, it was the conflicting stories. When eyewitness reports vary so differently from the news reports, when you're getting so much of an opposing opinion to what's actually being reported, those are the kind of things that would raise a flag for me, and then I would want to look at it deeper.
Okay, so first thing would be, because I'm sure you have a list of things, but first thing would be checking to see whether news reports conflict with eyewitness testimony. Is that right?
That
would be a huge red flag, yes.
Okay, cool.
How would you be able to distinguish which one is more accurate? Because I know that it's easy for all of us, myself included, to become, an internet researcher. And if I'm not there on location, to hear stories from eyewitness testimonies. And would you say that an eyewitness testimony is, for the most part, usually accurate, or that it's a reliable way of determining the truth in a lot of these scenarios?
Not all of the time, no, because especially in a high-tense situation like a shooting, people would be very distracted, and they could be very wrong about what they think they saw.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, actually. I think that evidence has shown time and time again that eyewitness testimony about a lot of stuff doesn't add up when we look at some more objective ways of knowing things like video surveillance footage and stuff like that.
What comes to mind is the Innocence Project, which basically there are quite a few people who have been released who were on death row for committing, crimes like murder and stuff. And then when DNA evidence came forth and we had the scientific capabilities to test, actual evidence that was, left at the scene of the crime, then they were exonerated. And so people's lives were almost ended. And there's an entire project that literally goes and tries to exonerate people who are on death row for crimes that they didn't commit, but they were put there by eyewitness testimony. So that to me, really screams that, oftentimes, eyewitnesses, even if there's, multiple, can still make mistakes, and they can still, especially if you're in a state of panic.
Yeah, I think so too. So bringing back to this conversation, you mentioned that the conflict between news and eyewitness testimony is a factor. And again, one of many different factors that you would suggest. But it seems to me that your belief also hinges on eyewitness testimony over official news reports, right? Because we're kind of questioning the validity of the news reports. Do you still
Well,
hold...
it may have sounded that way because I don't really trust the mainstream media.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Can I ask you specifically why?
Well, they've shown over and over again that they're untrustworthy.
Okay, but can I ask you like specific sources? Because mainstream media is kind of like a broad term that can be used to describe. Like, can you name a specific source, maybe?
Like a specific example of, I'm talking about the mainstream media that's owned by 6 corporations. That entire group, I try to stay away from that entire organization.
Okay, so you mean
just because
everything.
I have no faith in it anymore.
You mean CNN,
and
Fox,
examples would be
MSNBC, like everything.
Yeah, Fox, all of the big ones, news, MSNBC, CNN. I put no stock really in anything that they're reporting. I can't believe them anymore.
Okay, so even like subsidiaries of any of those news organizations, like local news that have an affiliate with the larger national organizations, do those count under those?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
What would you consider a trustworthy source?
Well, they all get their news from the same place, so you can go to the AP Newswire and find the same stories that the news is reporting on. You just don't have their particular spin on it.
Okay, the political spin.
Yeah.
Now, I know a lot of organizations, whether they're on the right or the left, if they are mainstream media, there are certain journalistic standards that they, require, that they, that me as a YouTuber, I can go out and really fact check and make some phone calls and send some emails and try to, go to the individuals and try to figure out, where are these stories coming from. But the fact is, most people I know, most YouTubers like me don't do that. Don't have the time or the energy or the resources, or even know how to. Do you think that when you say that the mainstream media, kind of as a generalized blanket, covering multiple different organizations, when you say that it's untrustworthy, do you think that they could get stuff wrong and make mistakes and still be trustworthy? Yeah,
absolutely. You could get, of course. And then if you're forthright with it and you come out and you say, hey, we misreported this particular story, that's a completely different thing than what I'm talking about. The media, this is all unread. This is not a conspiracy. Operation Mockingbird is a real thing. The CIA infiltrated the media way back in the 50s. And propaganda is legal to use against the American people. It was made legal by President Obama. And the government it's on record that they've used propaganda and portrayed it as news on the media. So that's different than misreporting a story and then having to retract it.
Okay, so this kind of, that's a whole other branch of stuff. That's what makes conversations like these so hard, because we only have so much time to talk about these things.
Right.
And there's a lot of things that we could talk about. But I just want to kind of just reel it right back into 9/11, right? Because that's what we kind of started off with at first. And just to kind of reel it back home and, kind of broadly cover this. So, this is interesting for me because I was in elementary school when 9/11 happened. I was very, very young. So everything that I've had to hear about is from other people. It wasn't something that I really kind of witnessed myself or knew any of the geopolitics that were behind it. But I have seen a growing movement of people who are going towards this idea that, hey, maybe there was some other stuff going on. And I think even polls that I've read have shown that there's a lot of Americans that feel the same way, that feel, hey, that maybe they don't think that it was a total shadow manipulation, but maybe that the full story wasn't exactly what was going on. And of course, with wartime stuff, we always have to be careful with the news because people have different points of views and different sides. So I want to go back to this question of knowing how we can know what's true and what's not true. You've mentioned a couple different things here. You've talked about maybe just not trusting mainstream news sources in general, which I think is super, super interesting. You talked about using science as a way of trying to validate things, whether or not they're physically possible. Are there any other methods that you would recommend about trying to figure out how to know whether things are true or not?
Just to do your own research. You can find out these things for yourself. You can look into things for yourself and learn for yourself. If you only take in what everyone tells you is true and you never question or look into whether it's true or not, I'm sure you appreciate this with your show, then you can't, how did you come to your own opinions on those things? So I would just say you look into everything. If something seems off to you, look at why. And if you find something, then you find something. If you don't, then you don't. But at least now you've found whatever you can now consider to be your truth.
Well, okay, so what I'm trying to get at a little bit more is, so for example, you have your own show where you talk about a lot of these ideas and stuff, right? So let's say me as like a casual observer who's trying to learn more information about this, like why should I, and playing devil's advocate here, right? Why should I trust your show and your source over other different sources? What makes the truth that you're spitting out about this more reliable than the next guy's?
Well, and I guess to double on top of that, how do we know that you're not planted by the CIA to put a spin on another story to throw people off from the real story?
Yeah.
And I'm to some extent I'm being facetious, but at the same time, like it's a legitimate question. Like, how can you tell?
Yeah. The way I would tell a shill, that's what I would call who you just described, is somebody that doesn't get into the Israel connection, that doesn't talk about Israel. When they stay away from that topic, I would consider that person to be a shill. And to get into the other question that you had asked me there, my sources of truth, I feel like I'm pulling from respected media that can be trusted. Like, I would trust and report on something I read in a WikiLeaks, because WikiLeaks has never had to retract a story in their whole entire existence. If I find something on the Newswire and then I can verify it on another one, because there's three big ones, and if I can verify it and check it out for myself, then I would go ahead and stand behind that. And my brand of truth would be valuable, because I don't try and push something that I can fully get behind. I'll be forthright with you and let you know. For example, you were saying a YouTuber can't go out and do the investigative journalism they may need to do. I'm forthright about that. So I'm not going to tell you, hey, this is 100% true.
Okay, yeah. So you value independent research, and you value sources that you can trust.
I think everyone should.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, like, one final question, because we do have to get on to other callers, and I do appreciate you coming on and talking to us. I want to know, like, how you value these sources. What gives these sources greater value than the mainstream media? I mean, you talked about corporate ownership kind of maybe affects how media might be portrayed, in the mainstream news sense. But going back to your sources of what you talk about, what gives you? So you mentioned WikiLeaks, like they don't never retract, statements and stuff like that.
Never had to.
Okay. Is there any other, like, for your understanding of how to find a reliable source? Do you have a methodology for that? Do you have a way of figuring that out?
Yeah, I mean, it ties into the big picture of not trusting mainstream media. So I stay away from that entirely, and then it'd be all independent sources. And I would just, it's a crapshoot, really. You find someone that you follow that is, in journalism, like say TYT, for example, is an independent channel where they were before they got bought. I would follow them. And they were at least forthright with you when they would misreport something, but they would cover things like Standing Rock that the mainstream media wouldn't even touch. So that's where I would get my news from, is independent journalism. And actually foreign channels like RT.
Okay, cool.
I was wondering if I could throw one final question in just to kind of wrap this one up.
Thomas wants another one in.
And that's because this is something that has always frustrated me in the realm of conspiracy theories is I would completely, and I'm going to kind of give away my position a little bit here, but I would completely agree with you that conspiracies happen.
Yes.
That there are things that the government does, whether it's MK Ultra or whether it's the Bay of Pigs or the Gulf of Tonkin, that, you know, they've been exposed. They didn't hide it well, and it leaked out. And most of these things, they were, rather small scale. Like with the case of MK Ultra, they were investigating the use of LSD on people without them knowing that they were taking it or something.
Mm-hmm.
Where would you draw the line between something like that and, say, a full-blown, reptilians from outer space are coming down and everyone is reptilian in government and they're controlling everything and they're puppet masters and everyone is in on it and there's hundreds of thousands or millions of people that are all lying to you and something like that, that's a grand conspiracy that's very, damn near impossible to cover up, versus something that is, kind of a small scale, hey, we can influence this government's election by doing, X, Y, Z. Where would you draw the line between something like that? And would you say that there's ever a point at which a grand conspiracy should be believed? Or at what point would it be acceptable to buy into something? And at what point would it just be the suspension of disbelief would be too difficult to buy into something?
It's a very difficult question, but I'll try to answer it as simply as I can. Of course, there's a line. I don't believe every conspiracy. I don't consider myself to be a flat earther, but I don't believe that NASA's telling me the truth. You see, that would be my line, I guess, something like that. I can't follow you all the way over that cliff, but I can at least get on board with you that NASA is a deceitful organization.
Okay. Well, Shawn, this is
Did that answer your question at all? Because that's how I took it, is that you wanted to know if I had some sort of a line or if there's a limit to what I'll believe.
Sort of. I think I would be curious because, just saying that NASA isn't something to be trusted, I don't know, on its face, that doesn't convince you of anything, right? Because that's your word versus somebody else's. But I think Thomas was he was really trying to get at was, okay, so you obviously don't believe in some conspiracy theories. Not all conspiracy theories are created equal. Is there a line? Like, he's looking for the line. He's looking for the the whole world is a matrix and we're all in a video game versus, a government did something one time
to manipulate an election.
At this point.
Because I'll look at something, even something like Bigfoot. To me, that's a very small scale, or Loch Ness. It's a very small scale conspiracy. It's, hey, maybe there's a big ape. Well, we know that there's apes. We know that there's bears. It could be just a bear sighting. To me, until I actually see evidence of a Bigfoot that's not just a blurry photograph that could be easily photoshopped, I'm gonna stay skeptical. I'm like, all right, I need some evidence. But to me, that's a small level thing. That's, but if all of a sudden everyone was saying that Bigfoot is everywhere and that he's taking over the bodies of humans and planting himself inside of them and ruling governments and stuff, that's kind of a grand scale conspiracy. That's a much bigger thing. And I'm wondering, how do you determine the conspiracies that are something small, like, hey, a government manipulating something, and they're, this one's believable, but this one is not. To me, 9/11 would be a line that I would draw. There's too many players that would have to be involved, too many people that would have to keep quiet and keep secret. When you start applying Occam's razor to it, it doesn't really hold water. That's my opinion. I understand that we're not here to argue or debate the truth of something. We're more looking at how you can get to truth, and I'm kind of curious how you would draw that line, or how you would go about determining a conspiracy that is, believable, scalable or small scale enough to buy into versus one that's just like, okay, now you're off your rocker.
Okay, I think I understand what you're asking me. The way that I would determine where to draw the line is, I guess it's not breaking down the same way for me. I don't look at it the same way. I don't, I do have grand conspiracies. I believe in the New World Order and the Illuminati. I don't think that's unbelievable. I also don't think that 9/11 being a false flag operation carried out by our government with the help of Israel is unbelievable either. Because I don't think you need that many people involved, you see. I've heard that argument, but I don't think you need that many people involved. Because not everyone's being deceptive with you. Not everyone even knows what they're involved in. Like, for example, when they built the atomic bomb, they used compartmentalization. Most people didn't know they were working on an atomic bomb.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. So, like, in your worldview, it's not without maybe a new world order and people being reptilians and what Thomas is talking about here.
Reptilians I don't buy into.
Reptilians don't buy into.
Yeah.
So there you go. So there's a distinction you're making, right? Reptilians are out of the way.
What you're looking for? Okay. Well, I went with the flat Earth example earlier, and it didn't seem like it answered his question. I thought that's what he was looking for, but
what, like, we want to know. Okay, so you don't accept flat Earth. You don't accept reptilians. We don't really know what makes. So for us, like the realm of plausibility.
What's the difference? Why is flat Earth ridiculous?
Yeah. You know, like, just like for me, I would say flat Earth is ridiculous because of like scientific advancements and stuff and how we understand the universe. Right? Like, that's a method I would use.
Yeah, I hear a lot of the same arguments being used for flat Earth, like, you know, we can't trust NASA, and that the government is covering it up, and that you know, because they're trying to. Usually, it's put forth by Christians or Muslims or religious people who maybe they'll read a literal interpretation that makes it seem like the Earth is flat, and they'll say, "Look, they're just it's an atheist agenda to try to destroy people's faith."
Right.
And
so Thomas is like, for these people, they're actually using the Bible or the Quran to justify their worldview. They're saying, oh, I know this is true because this source is telling me that this is true. So like there's the method, and that's kind of what we're trying to get at with the question. So like the method.
What is the source?
Yeah, but
they'll use the same type of arguments. Like the government pulls off conspiracies. Why wouldn't they pull off a flat Earth conspiracy? The government, NASA's not to be trusted, so therefore all these pictures from NASA must be photoshopped of the Earth. And, it starts getting to this grand scale where you have all these other countries and all their space programs that are in on it. You've got all this other stuff that's going on. And to me, it requires a tremendous amount of, suspension of belief in order to buy into the flat Earth thing. But that's me, and I realize that the flat Earth is one that you don't believe in. But why don't you believe in the flat Earth based off of the arguments that they're putting forth versus something like 9/11 that have the same type of arguments behind it? What's the distinction, the difference?
I think I got you now. We're on the same page now. Finally,
great.
Took me a little while to catch up with you, but all right. When I think about flat Earth, I don't trust NASA. So I can agree with you that they have reasons to believe that because of their mistrust of NASA or their reasons for not trusting NASA. But I don't have the ability to do a lot of the experiments that would need to be necessary to do to say something is the Earth is flat. I don't understand those things. There's sometimes I have to leave it up to those that know more than me. I believe that there's too many of them that would have to be lying to me in that particular instance.
When you say too many of them, do you mean like scientific experts, like physicists and stuff?
There's too many. Yeah, everything I've ever been taught, every teacher I've ever had, every scientist that I've ever read, their research or their discoveries about different things, they were all lying to me. They had to all been involved. That's too many people. So sometimes I do join you on the too many people argument.
Okay. Yeah, because I was about to say, everyone I've ever heard that's talked to me about 9/11 has said that the official story is true, and that would be that my teachers and my parents and other people are all lying to me there, so...
Or, if the majority of engineers and scientists and whatnot said that, that we can reconstruct this demolition the building collapse and show it's not a demolition and do it through a building fire and show that fire and heat does damage the structural integrity of steel enough for it to bend and collapse the way that it did. You know, if the majority consensus of experts, and I'm not talking government paid experts, I'm talking people who are, you know, just engineers, average everyday people who've gone to university, who've studied, who, you know, are well versed in the topics. You know, if they're able to show stuff like this, you know, would that be, you know, a convincing argument in the same way that it's a convincing argument for the flat Earth for you?
Yeah, if I saw real evidence put forth in front of me, I would have to acknowledge it. I mean, my beliefs aren't etched in stone, so it could be changed. If I was shown proof that I could accept as proof, like you were saying, from an acceptable source that I could trust, yes, my view could be changed.
Okay, cool. Well, I think that's all the time that we have for this call.
Yeah. Sorry, I dragged that one out.
That was
I know we have other callers
fantastic.
on the line.
Thomas, you were asking really great questions. And Shawn, I really appreciate you coming on your show, expressing your views. I thought this was a really interesting conversation. I want to do two things for you, Shawn, because you did plug my show yesterday, and without me asking you to do anything, I want you to just briefly, because you're on today, I'd love for you to just, you know, give a quick shout out for your show, what you do, so people can find you. And the second thing is, I want you to promise me that you're going to call again so that we can talk about the NASA moon landing conspiracy stuff, because I'd love to have a conversation about that.
Absolutely, I would call again. I had a great time. And the show is called Conspiracy Theories and Chill, and I stream it live from my Facebook page. And you just follow me on Facebook. It's Shawn Yankee. I know there's 3 Shawn Yankees, but I'm the good-looking one with the sunglasses on. And I also have a YouTube channel called Me on Things and Stuff.
That's
and I
awesome.
archive everything there.
Okay, so people who are watching this and want to get more engaged in the conversation, go to those pages and be nice and talk to people who think differently than you and have good conversations.
It sounds kind of like Netflix and chill, but with like the X-Files theme song in the background the whole time. Like,
right.
Investigations. All right. Well, Shawn,
Yeah,
this was a great conversation. I'd love to hear from you again. Thanks again for calling.
Thank you.
Well, what did you think of that, Thomas?
It was interesting that this approach is different from what I'm used to, because like there were a bunch of times when I had to kind of step back because I wanted to be like, well, what about this source and this, you know, and I wanted to just like pummel him with you know, resources and stuff. But it's really interesting to use this approach, because it's like kind of almost peeling back the layers of the onion to look inside and be like, what makes someone think the way that they do? What does, and it's extremely eye-opening, especially whether it's a conspiracy theorist. And I'd love if you were able to get a flat earther on sometime.
I'd love to
try to figure out how is it that they make this leap. What is that? Are there certain missing pieces of education that are there that, you know, they don't have a scientific basis to know how to fact check or know how to, you know, run the math or
that's some interesting
the tests,
presumptions. I also think it's like, you know, like there's different warrants to these kinds of, because like you said, some conspiracies are real, like that happens, and I do agree with that. So like we can't just make fast and hard rules for a lot of these kinds of stuff. I think you have to do it by a case basis, like you said, peeling back the layers individually and talking about these things. And in this case, there was a lot of warrants and assumptions being made. One of the biggest ones, for example, not trusting mainstream news. And I really wanted to get more of that. It's like, okay, so now we have a source problem, right? Because like that's a lot of things. And so can we really say that all of those things aren't trustworthy? Or can some of those be trustworthy some of the time? Like, you know, because that's almost a conspiracy in itself. And there's a lot of layers to this, you know?
I agree with him partially in that mainstream media, it does have a political agenda. Everyone, you have a political agenda. I have a political agenda. The amount that we play up to it, you know, we can do our best to try to be neutral on issues and to just present the facts. And I think that, you know, the onus is on us to try to do that if we are actually putting forth a you know, journalistic perspective on something. Where I think I would disagree with him is that there is a tremendous amount of effort that is put into fact checking.
Yes.
There are entire fact checking teams from these mainstream media sources. And that's such a general term. That's a blanket term. But there's if CNN gets something wrong, you damn well better believe that Fox News is going to call them out on it. If Fox News gets something out that's wrong, you're going to see John Oliver doing a bit on it. They're tearing each other apart. They're looking for any kind of inconsistencies or anything to try to show how the other side is wrong. And so they are doing their best. They are doing their best to present information in as accurate of a way as possible. Now, are there different, some sources that are more and less reliable? Sure. But I would say, first, if you want to know if something is true or not, is it scientifically possible?
Yes.
Is it, something like, the Earth being flat, like we can demonstrably prove and we can run experiments and we can show that it's BS. And then it's like, is it believable? Is it plausible? How many people would have to be in on this? How much, when you start applying Occam's razor to it and say, how many assumptions do we have to make, for this to be true? It's like, if there's two different competing, ideas, the one that puts forth the least assumptions is probably the one you should go with, and you have a safer bet going with that. And then what is the motive? And is that the most plausible way for them to go about that to accomplish the motive? Most conspiracy theories, I find, don't really stack up under this kind of scrutiny. But I know we have two more callers.
Yeah, but like what you just said there is very similar to the methods that I use all the time when I'm doing the research myself on these kinds of things, right? Plausibility, we're talking about physical possibility, we're talking about all these things that we can use to check. And like what you're describing takes effort. What you're describing is something that the average person who doesn't always have the resources to do these things on their own, can't always do for every single belief. And for all of our beliefs, it's impossible. We can't just know. But I do think that because of that we have to keep our beliefs, keep strongly to the ones that we've tested the most and known the most, and not have too many beliefs that we can't verify, because then it becomes a problem of falsification. It becomes a problem of knowing what's true and what's not true.
And just because something seems like you're like, oh, that doesn't seem to stack up. This story was released and this, doesn't match up with the eyewitness testimony and stuff, like, it's really easy for us on the outside to assume that there's some type of conspiracy and to then start becoming internet, investigators and stuff. This happened during the Boston Marathon bombings.
Yeah.
Where
exactly.
There was like one news source that like they preemptively, like obviously they're in a rush to get news out faster, and they want to be the first to the story. And so one of them misreported that like the guy had been captured and he hadn't been captured yet, and they're like, oh look, it's not reliable. It's like, okay, it's not that the news outlet was deliberately trying to lie. Like the guy was, caught a little bit later. Then there were all these people saying like, look, the bombings were, there was this, SWAT or some like, government groups that were there at the thing. It's like, well, yeah, there's always law enforcement at big events like that. There's always people trying to look to, for any kind of threat. And to try to jump to conclusions based off of, I saw some pictures on the internet and I tried to piece some things together and find some correlations or connections. You got to be careful with that.
Yeah.
You got to be careful.
For sure.